Here we go. We're live again for 2 days in a row. This is a huge and resounding success for all of us that I made a promise yesterday and I followed through. Daddy's going to be there for you, okay? Daddy, when Daddy promises you a trip to Disney World, he's going to follow through eventually. But I'm Seth Payne, played for the Houston Texans back in the day, 10 years in the NFL. This is my YouTube channel, and today I realized that I never actually talked to you guys about the DeMeco Ryans press conference on the second day of minicamp. I haven't played all the clips from my interview, Sean Pendergast and myself's interview of Nick Caserio that I wanted to get to, and that also Matt Burke. I neglected to share my thoughts on Matt Burke. So I want to go through all of those things. Matt Burke, the defensive coordinator for the Texans. And we'll get it started right now with DeMeco Ryans. DeMeco on the second day of mini camps was asked about the combination of Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter.
Will and Will, I think they instantly have this connection, right, that you need for both of those ends, like playing off of each other, right, picking each other's brain. Danielle is he's a veteran in the league. He's done it for a while, so Will being able to lean on him, for advice of how he's seen it done, I think that's very important.
Yeah, and we talked about this yesterday, and I've done a couple videos on Will Anderson and how he and Danielle Hunter will interact. And I do think that we used to talk about this with J.J. Watt back when J.J. was an interior player, and you thought about Jadeveon Clowney playing on the same side as J.J. Watt or what have you. One of the biggest binds you can put an offense in is when you've got two really good edge rushers, because then when it comes to sliding protection and everything else that goes along with it, it's a real headache. It becomes a lot of times leaving a running back alone on a defensive end who's really, really good in certain situations. This is the kind of stuff that gets offensive coordinators fired, because things like, how the hell could you put a tight end on Danielle Hunter, or how the hell could you put a running back on Will Anderson? That's where you get offensive coordinators fired that way, because sometimes they get put in a bind. I do think that Will Anderson just being a sponge for all of the information that Danielle Hunter can give him. And I also, the dynamic of Danielle Hunter really seeming like he's got a calm and patient demeanor. I feel like both he and Stefon Diggs, surprisingly enough, it wasn't a surprise with Danielle, but a surprise perhaps with Stefon Diggs. I think they're going to step into this role of father figure or older brother really well. Stefon Diggs, when he talked about being older and being able to impart wisdom to Nico Collins and Tank Dell. I mean, it's just a press conference and everything. You don't want to read too much into it, but it was nice to see. Next was DeMeco Ryans on Kamari Lassiter, the second-round cornerback.
What I've seen from Kamari is I've seen a guy who's been locked in from day one since he's gotten here. He's been locked in. He's done everything we've asked him to do. Kamari's a guy who doesn't make the same mistake twice, right? He's very competitive. He's making plays, like instinctive player, and I think a lot of guys are fired up to see what he's been able to do over the past couple weeks.
Yeah, and a lot of what various guys like Nick Caserio talked about him when we interviewed him. Matt Burke has talked about Kamari Lassiter. They really keep coming back to the physical side of things as well. And a lot of what they say about Kamari Lassiter fits in with the thing that you'd think about a classic, I don't want to say a zone cornerback or a cover two, but a guy who's really adept at playing zone and can play man, and you're going to rely on him to play man a bunch in the modern NFL. But a lot of those things coming up and supporting the run, coming up on soft spots when you're playing zone, because DeMeco's always going to play a lot of zone. It's a defensive line-driven defense. They're going to play a lot of zone. You want guys that can come up and deliver a hammer in that kill zone. And Kamari shows every bit of that. I think physically he's built that way. He's thicker than you expect. And a lot of things you might say about Rondé Barber, for instance. So Rondé Barber, there was always, I don't know if you even want to call it controversy. Rondé Barber was a different type of cornerback than, say, a Darrelle Revis. But Rondé Barber was really, really good for what they asked him to do. And it wasn't, tracking one guy all over the place in one-on-one coverage or anything. It was being super smart, super physical, versatile, all those things. I think that's what they hope to get out of Kamari Lassiter. And so far, like in camp, he's shown that he can pick up the scheme. He's shown an awareness. He can break on the ball really well. and I feel good about him. I'm going to make a comparison here. That please don't get all shocked and alarmed when I do this, but Lonnie Johnson. Okay, just settle down. Settle down for a second. Lonnie Johnson is on the squad right now for one. He's grown, he's matured. But Lonnie Johnson was a guy who was super physical in college. Not nearly the same level of production as Kamari Lassiter. There were a lot of differences in terms of polish and maturity and everything else like that. But the one obstacle Lonnie had that he had a really hard time overcoming was that, man, he was a physical guy and he kept playing too grabby. He just kept trying to play like you can get away with in college, where you're just using your hands way more than you're allowed to in the NFL. That's something that Kamari's going to have to work his way out of and through, that typical transition of a guy that was pretty handsy in college and knew how to toe the line and didn't go too far with it. But you got to learn to trust your feet. So that'll be interesting to watch once the pads come on, once teams start game planning for you. I know on the thumbnail it said lurking issues. That we'll talk about the lurking issues. Some of that was just because it was a really funny photo of Matt Burke kind of looking like he was lurking over us. So I wanted to use it that way. So my lurking issue for Kamari Lassiter, more so than anything, is how is he going to transition into being a physical college player, into being hopefully still physical, but you got to be selectively physical in there. They're just it's like the damn Gestapo out there with these poor defensive backs. They don't deserve it. Composition of the defensive line, which I know has been a hot topic for a lot of you guys as well, the defensive tackle position specifically.
I want as much depth as possible on our defensive line, right? And when you can get guys like DeMeco, Daniil, Tim, veteran guys who've played a lot of football, right, and they've made a lot of plays, they know what it looks like. And so it's easy for those guys to come into our system and transition very quickly.
Yeah. Whoa. Nick's going to mention somebody there in a second. I got excited because I mixed the Nick in there. I'm not as concerned about the composition of the defensive line because, for one, okay, and I know Denico Autry, yes, he can play inside. That's going to be on passing downs. Like, Denico's not necessarily who you want in there against a heavy set with a fullback on 3rd and 2. You're not necessarily going to want Denico Autry in there at defensive tackle, but he can play inside a good amount. He's just not a classic 3 technique. So on passing situations and against passing personnel, yeah, you're going to see a lot of Denico Autry. But a lot of it really just comes down to, at times last year, the Texans lacked bulk on the inside. And not to say anything of Malik Collins or anybody else that was playing in there. I thought they did a good job for who they are as players, which is more like medium-sized defensive tackles. I think just when you look at Tim Settle, hold up a second, everybody. I know for those of you who are catching your first live stream, this is what you have to deal with, okay? But Fatukasi, Heinisch is still out there. There's a better complement of, I think, packages that you can put in there in various situations. And then you've got multiple defensive ends that can play inside. I know somebody yesterday mentioned Daniil Hunter playing inside in pass rush situations. When he does that's typically going to be like on 3rd and long, where he's stand-up, like a stand-up linebacker over the center or something. That's not like a staple of what Daniil Hunter does. You don't necessarily want him down in there when there's any threat of run whatsoever. It's going to be in those stream passing situations. But that is the defensive tackle spot right now is one that, in some respects, the linebackers are going to have to make up for. I think if Christian Harris can develop into what his ability is, and if Azeez Alshire can play as well as I've seen him play, just having the big bodies in there at times is enough in certain run situations. And pass situation, again, I think we're okay on the pass side of it. Next one for DeMeco was, no, this was Caserio on McTelvin McGinn.
Very quickly.
One guy that nobody has really talked about or nobody even heard of because we signed him as a reserve future player is McTelvin again, right, who was on a practice squad in Indy. But he's shown some things just from a size movement standpoint. He's another player that's worked, from February. So
McTelvin, again, who I've done zero research on since Nick mentioned that, but it's in the back of my brain. I should probably do a video on him. It won't be received well. It'll just be for the diehards that want to go and consume that. But the fact Caserio, Caserio's not one to just trumpet people randomly. At times, depending on what mood he's in, sometimes he goes back to old school Patriots way and doesn't want to say anything nice about anything. Like not in a jerky way, just kind of just in being careful about stuff. So that's going to be an interesting one during training camp. Next, this is DeMeco on Denico Autry, speaking about that versatility.
He's one of the toughest players, I think, and one of the toughest and most respected players across the league. Like, you talk to any offensive lineman that's went against him, he has their utmost respect. So, and you see the way he plays the game the right way. How I see he plays hard, he plays with the intensity that's unmatched, and he still finds a way to get in the backfield, moving around, playing multiple spots, whether it's at the interior or on the edge. He's just a tough, hard-nosed football player that's unbreakable.
Yeah, the culture stuff is strong with Denico Autry, and I feel really good about him. A few of you had mentioned Khalil Davis. Yes, I should have included him in there too. But frankly, there's a boatload of competition at defensive tackle right now. And, like the Fadakasi said, I'll be DTs on rundowns. Rundown gets tricky. It's more versus personnel packages these days. Let's see. He is violent on the line. I don't know. You're responding to Texans fan. Denico Autry is going to give Caleb Williams a welcome to the NFL hit. Yeah, there's guys to get excited about on the defensive line. It's just a defensive tackle. It's a wide open competition at this point, and you're going to have at least 4 guys rotating in and playing at different times. It's one of the good and the bad things about rotating defensive linemen is that you don't necessarily always get to just even really learn or fall in love with some of the guys who play for like 4 games and then they're gone, but you don't even realize that they're not active on that game day. But I know it gets uncomfortable for people because you're at this stage in the career where you want to be able to look at a concrete depth chart and think, yep, this is exactly who we're going to have all the time. It's going to change up a lot of defensive line. And I think from week 1 to week 8, week 17, I think you're gonna have some different guys in there. It'll be a rolling competition. This is DeMeco on Kalen Bullock.
Yeah, Kalen, again, another rookie who's come in and he's done a really nice job of the communication piece. I know we ask a lot of our safeties and communicating in our defense, and Kalen, he's picked that up as he's been here the past couple of weeks, and I know he'll continue to improve upon his communication skills. But a guy who can roam the back end and go make plays, like he's shown that.
Yeah, the communication part, that's a bigger deal than it might sound like. A lot of times with rookies, it's the biggest obstacle is just getting them to talk because they're out there and they're trying to absorb everything and, they don't want to step on anybody's toes. But, you need to teach them how to communicate and how to be loud. Even on the defensive line, that's a big deal. When mental errors are made, a lot of times they could have been avoided if guys were communicating loudly on the defensive line. So as rookies especially, they're just meek little delicate creatures. They're little baby fawns. And you need them to grow up into just angry testosterone-fueled bucks that are loud and that snort a lot. So it sounds like Kalen Bullock is snorting appropriately. I think with Kalen Bullock, that's another one. It's going to be really interesting to see exactly how everything fits together, like how much they trust Bullock early on, and how much that perhaps sometimes if Jimmy Ward is injured or if Jimmy Ward is out or what have you, that they might play a little bit more conventional. Hey, Kalen Bullock's your deep safety. Jalen Ramsey's going to roam up around the box or use him creatively. Jalen Ramsey, who Matt Burke will talk about a little bit later, I'm allowing myself to be optimistic about him. And some of it's just from going back and watching some Christian Harris and just the linebacker play in general last year. I think there were times where Jalen Ramsey maybe was trying to do the right thing and trying to do what you do as a safety, which is cover everybody's ass. And there were the linebackers just weren't great against play action. There were times where things weren't hemmed up front the way they should have been, and at times Jalen Ramsey was a little aggressive in trying to fix everything, and he left the cornerbacks out to dry, or he just got beat on double moves, whatever it might be. I think that given Ramsey's work ethic, given his football IQ, given all those other things, I think you're going to see a more, I guess mature is the right word, but that implies that he was immature to begin with, but it just mature as a football player, and especially as a safety. Like, you got to be the wise old man in some respects when they're asking you to be a true and genuine safety. So that I would expect Bullock early on, I would say, like, might get 15 snaps a game early on, and then depending how well he does through those first few games, you might start to see him more. But I know they also, we've all seen he's got very skinny legs, he's got a long, lanky frame. He's going to have to put on some mass, but I don't think that's going to be the thing that holds him back over time. I think they really like his ball skills. I think DeMeco would love to have more turnovers next year than they had this year, and Bullock can be a big part of that. So there wasn't a bunch of buzz about him in OTAs or minicamp, but you're also at that stage of the year where, man, most of the safeties that do really good work, a lot of it's based on understanding tendencies, understanding the game plan, and specific stuff that doesn't necessarily show up when you're just running everything vanilla and doing a lot of one-on-ones and notepads and all that other stuff. Next question that DeMeco handled was, this is this is nice to hear. This is DeMeco on Brevin Jordan.
Yeah, Brevin. I joke with the guys. I show plays from practice, from the previous practice in our team.
All right. Damn it. How many times did I say Jalen Ramsey? Son of a... Everything was going so well. Now I hate... All right. Jalen Ramsey. My God. Everything I said about Jalen Ramsey, I meant to say about Jalen Petrie. There you go.
I joke with the guys. I show plays from practice, from the previous practice in our team meetings. I have my daily Brevin clip. Like, I show a clip of Brevin every day. He has a highlight of, just Brevin's playing so fast, so decisive, and he's making some really great catches, tough catches. He's done a great job for himself over this offseason as well, man. He's improved. I see him. He's confident. He believes that he's a dude, and he can be for us, and he is.
I can't get over this Jalen Ramsey thing. So Jalen Petrie was the guy I was talking about. With Jalen Ramsey and the way he moves around, there's a very good chance that maybe the Texans had acquired Jalen Ramsey yesterday, and you guys didn't know about it yet. So I deeply apologize for any of the confusion. For those of you new to the channel, this is an ongoing issue of mine, which is the name swap errors. I'm like an old man. Like my it's not like early onset dementia or anything. My dad and my grandpa were both like this early in their life. So when I get through an entire episode or a segment on the radio show without making a name swap error, I get a little ding, and so I'll get no ding. After we go through Nick Caserio, if I don't make any name swap errors during Nick Caserio, then I'll give myself a ding. As far as Brevin Jordan, the tight end for the Houston Texans, I'm intrigued by this. And we saw them use him creatively or with a lot of flexibility last year. We saw him being used out of the backfield. And the one thing that I really liked about it was later in the year, one of the games in which he was used in the backfield, he did a few things that are pretty savvy that kind of put a defensive end in a blender in terms of your reads, where he would make it look like he was trying to kick out the tight end or kick out the defensive end, but then at the last moment bend around and turn it into a route. Like, he did some really nice things. We remember the long touchdown in the Cleveland game. So exactly how they use him, I think, is anybody's guess from week to week. I guess it'll get interesting if he comes up on free agency and they got to make a decision on just how valuable a guy like him is, because he's not, I don't think he's ever going to be a genuine inline tight end. He just doesn't really have the size. He's got the willingness, but necessarily the size to be as much of a blocker as you want in there. But they can definitely use him as a weapon. He'll show up as long as he stays healthy this year. He's going to show up in a few big moments, and I'm excited for Brevin Jordan because he's just like a classic kid. He plays hard, tries to do everything the right way, but he's kind of gotten caught up in the mix a few times from scheme to scheme to scheme over the years. Now he'll have his second year in the scheme, and I'm excited for him. At the very least, maybe he'll have a really good year for the Texans, and he goes off and gets a nice payday somewhere else. DeMeco Ryans, correct? There's an S at the end. DeMeco Ryans on leadership.
With the leadership, for me, leadership is about everyone. You want a good mix of guys, right? You want veteran guys where the rookies can talk to those guys, but also for me, the rookies can lead too, right? It's just a matter of all those guys just connecting and how tight can they become as a group. And our D-line group, that's a world of its own, right? And they have a really good bond in that room.
This is a stark departure from the Bill O'Brien mantra of rookies don't know anything, which is true to agree. They don't to a degree, but they don't know anything. But the ones that are good dudes, like, they have to learn it on the fly. It's one of the old school mentalities that some coaches continue to cling to in sports that drives me insane. And I love the old school mentality. And back when we were tougher on rookies and we'd haze them, and I'm like, okay, that's all well and good. But the fact of the matter is, in the modern NFL, you're only going to have guys for a few years, and you got to figure out who they are as early as possible, and you're going to need them to contribute as quickly as possible. So if you have the attitude of not trusting rookies these days, it just makes me question, like, how much do you actually want to coach? Other teams are using rookies and using them effectively. And obviously, I'm not criticizing DeMeco on this. DeMeco put C.J. Stroud and Will Anderson out there as leaders of the team very early last year. But it's a weakness if all of a sudden you start putting barriers on guys contributing to your football team because you got some old notion about how rookies have to bide their time. It's a nice notion, but it's stupid. Like many things that are nice in life, they're stupid. Like Jalen Ramsey guy here. DeMeco, okay, this is in terms of lurking issues. We'll talk about, okay, first competition at the quarterback position. So DeMeco on competition at the quarterback position.
Yeah, competition at the quarterback spot, for me, you can't have too many quarterbacks, right? And as you see throughout the season, right, there are a lot you lose a guy, and who's stepping in, right? We can't cancel the games because the quarterback is not in, so that competition is real. Davis has improved a lot. Davis has done a great job. Case has done a great job as well, and we have Tim competing, so it's a good group of backup quarterbacks that are competing, a healthy competition there. Yeah, with Kenyon, what I've seen is...
So Tim Boyle is the Tim that he was referring to, which Tim, how many games did he start last year for the Jets, right? Or am I mixing up my years already and getting confused? There were so many Jets quarterbacks last year. So this is going to be interesting. You remember when there was that training camp the one year where everybody and anybody was coming out of Patriots camp just raving about Ryan Mallett? And I'm not saying this to be mean to Ryan Mallett or anything, RIP, but like they were trumpeting how good Ryan Mallett had gotten. And boy, man, did you see him in those combined practices with the Ravens, whoever it was? He was just incredible. I think it was Washington. He was incredible against Washington in those combined practices. It looked like a polished pro. And it got to the point where the rumor mill was going, and Mike Mayock was on NFL Network saying he's never seen a guy this ready, like all this stuff. And it turned out to be they were just trying to push him to get a trade and maybe get a second-round pick for him. The Texans would eventually pay a much more reasonable price for Ryan Mallett. Now, having said all that, I'm not opposed to utilizing that strategy with Davis Mills. I would go into this training camp like looking at it as a showcase for Davis Mills, game plan more than I typically would for a preseason game, do everything I can to show the very best part of Davis Mills, and then trade him off for something if the situation arises. It's one of the nice things about running a Kubiak-Shanahan system is that there's like half the teams in the league are running some version, or they are direct proteges to Kyle Shanahan or Gary Kubiak. In the case of Stefanski, that's more of a Kubiak influence. So the terminology, the concepts, a lot of the way that these offenses operate if a quarterback gets injured, Davis Mills can step into those, and he's had a lot of exposure to it. And I like having Case as a backup. I think if your backup can win you 50% of the games that he enters and can run the game plan and keep things together, I just like having Case around. I'm selfish because he looks like a young me, just much skinnier. This is, let's do DeMeco Ryans on Kenyon Green. So talking about lingering issues, this would be a big question mark or a lingering issue is Kenyon Green, who looked physically completely different in OTAs than the Kenyon Green we've seen. He's been working his butt off in the weight room and with his conditioning and probably really paying attention to what he's eating. And he looks a lot better than he had these first couple years.
Credit to him for the work that he's done. He's changed his body. He's looking good, looking lean. He's able to move better, and I see a more athletic guy. I see a guy who's actually been able to stay on the field, and that's been the main thing I think for Kenyon. Important year for him is just availability, just being out there. And now the ball is the ball. He'll continue to improve and get better in those regards. But for him, the main thing is just him being healthy and being on the field, giving himself a chance to compete. I think we all need that encouragement, especially when you're on IR. It gets lonely at times. It's a difficult time when you're going through an injury. Everybody else is going out to practice, and you're going home. It's a tough spot to be in. But he's been encouraged through it all, seeing a smile on his face. He was, for me, he always said, "Man, Coach, I'm ready to get back out there. It looks like it's fun out there. I'm excited to go play again."
Yeah, and I don't want to get ahead of myself because he's still got to prove it on the field. If I were to go back and just give you a minute of plays from the Bears game, and I just went through 3 straight series and just kind of picked out a few plays here. So this is his rookie year, Kenyon Green, and I slowed these down to about half speed. For one, that defensive tackle moved inside just before the snap, which can be a mind screw for you as an offensive lineman. But he did some good things here. Like you see, gets a piece of the defensive tackle so Quesenberry can take him over. I would call this. He wouldn't have gotten called for that. That was a legal hold. As long as your feet keep moving in the NFL anymore, you can basically bear hug a defensive tackle. Left guard here again. Defensive tackle peaks a little too soon. Like Kenyon Green's theoretically out of position there, but Damian gets a really nice run on it. Left guard again, helps out Laramie Tunsil, and then works up to the linebacker. Linebacker wants a holding call, but they're not at the point of attack. Look at Damian go. Left guard gets his piece of the defensive tackle, so Laramie Tunsil can work up to him. Kenyon on either a safety or a linebacker just trucking him into the end zone. Like there were some good, just solid football plays out of him in this game, and this is before the litany of injuries really started to take hold. Again, somebody crosses his face, and I thought he did a good job a few times in this game of recognizing movement and adjusting to it without looking overwhelmed. Nice piece here. This right here, this is the thing. Even though this is late in the down, he's a big, strong guy, and he had a tendency sometimes to still just kind of get out over his skis and lean into guys, and would have gotten beat late there if the ball hadn't gotten away. But this is a nice one here. Him pulling, and he got more confident with it as the game went along. Early in this game, he was kind of tentative when he was pulling, but he did some really nice things. I was intrigued by his athleticism, and this is before he got all swole like he is now. Picking up the blitz, I think this is something he did well in college. He really is very patient and sits back and diagnoses. It's just a matter of refining the technique and staying healthy. I'm cautiously optimistic that he's going to be okay. It's just that he's got to stay healthy and he's got to stay out on the field. I think Jarrett Patterson's going to probably get better due to the competition. I'm intrigued by Jarrett Patterson as well. So some good competition there, but obviously left guard and center until we see Juice Scruggs actually playing a bunch of center in the NFL. Those are the two huge question marks where you could be just pulling your hair out after the game, just screaming. As happy as you feel about Nick Caserio right now, you're going to be flipping out if the left guard and center positions come week 3 or week 4. I know you. I know me. That's exactly how we're going to be feeling about it, no matter how we feel right now. So that those were the lingering answers that DeMeco gave that I had neglected to address. I had never addressed the fact that apparently I think Jalen Ramsey and Jalen Petrie are the same person. Well, in fact, they are quite different. But still a lot of reasons to be optimistic. I haven't changed anything or started to second-guess myself with the Texans. I feel very, very good about this offseason. We had Nick Caserio on Payne and Pendergast right before I left on vacation a little while ago. And I showed you guys last week the players that I got excited about based on what Nick had told me. But he said a few more interesting things, especially on the business side, that were intriguing to me, and just also on some of the team management and the way they approach players with contract negotiations. But we did have to ask him about the social media policy. Oh, wait. First, let me show. I'll just get past this. Hold on a second. He had talked about Kenyon Green too, but we'll just go ahead and this was him commenting on Kenyon Green.
He went up to Oregon and worked with a group for about 4 to 5 weeks. So it was just kind of a different stimulus, kind of a different training. I think Ndamukong Suh works with a number of players up in Oregon.
That's where he's from, yeah.
Yeah, so he went up there for a few weeks, and I mean sometimes players honestly they just need a change of scenery, just something different, and it worked for him. And he came back. He's in a good headspace, so frame of mind's important. So credit to him, credit the work that he's put in. So, I mean, again, the true test will come in training camp.
Yeah, and I played that the other day too, but just Caserio leapfrogging on what DeMeco said, that he's physically in a really good spot right now. I guess the one lingering concern would also be just that is Kenyon Green simply an injury-prone guy? You know, he's had that many injuries. Is it just that he's always going to get injured, or is it that he came into the league while he was rehabbing a knee and that kept him from moving well, and you start that whole anatomical chain reaction? I hope that's what it was. I feel bad that he had to go through it, but that does happen sometimes. Guys just have one body part that's ailing, and that affects another body part because they're overcompensating or they come back too early. So hopefully that's what it was, and he'll have a long and fruitful and productive career. Caserio, on the in the wake of C.J. Stroud, like being very comfortable on podcasts and just, you know, starting beef or continuing beef with the Colts linebackers or what have you, and I know you guys have various feelings about that. We just asked Caserio about how do you handle being an older guy from a different generation, knowing that these guys are going to be on social media, and just how do you talk to them about it?
Just protect the team. Always thinking about the team first and foremost, making sure your focus is on football first and foremost, because your football is what leads to those opportunities. Yeah. So hasn't affected his work in the offseason. Nobody works as hard as CJ. He's committed to winning. He wants to be great. I mean, you all have heard him talk. I mean, he cares a lot about winning. So, and if you care a lot about winning, you're going to put a lot of work into football. So everybody's got their own personality, and to your point, that's something that DeMeco and I have talked about. Just be yourself. Just be who you are. We're not going to force feed you or force you to do something.
The thing about CJ on the podcasts, and whichever fan base would get upset about whichever comment that he made, I think the big difference with CJ and some of the headline grabbing stuff that he's said on podcasts when he's having a conversation, they come from a place where it's him having a conversation with guys, and it's stuff that he would have said to their faces. I think it's just CJ sitting in the barbershop having an argument with guys about sports. And there's a difference, and I don't think I'm just carrying water for CJ here or anything. If you think about some of the guys who have been notoriously almost antisocial in the way they behave off the field, Terrell Owens, he had interpersonal issues with teammates, and that extended outward onto the team. A lot of the other guys that just do things curiously on social media, it's more of a symptom of a lot of the other things that are issues for them as players, whether they're locker room cancers or what have you. And with CJ, I just don't get that sense at all. I think that it might make it fun because I think fan bases like the Colts already, and perhaps the Jets because of where CJ power ranked Aaron Rodgers, like some of the fan bases might be already starting to, I would say, prematurely hate CJ. Usually the young quarterbacks aren't hated until your team has got beaten by them a bunch of times over and over again. But I feel like some of that good animosity from other fan bases might be good. especially if it keeps anybody from tempting him in free agency. Next was Caserio on how they handle negotiating with players who are already on the team, saying, I believe this came in a conversation about their negotiations with Nico Collins.
In the end, anytime you negotiate, everybody wants to feel decent about how the negotiation went. Mm-hmm. We're not trying to, quote unquote, win a negotiation. We're trying to do what we think is best for the organization, slot the player in accordingly where we think he fits. And you have to balance. And the hard part for us is we're worried about the Houston Texans and how our team is put together. Sometimes a player and the agent are looking at it from an individual lens, and they're focused on it, and no problem at all. And then they're looking around and what's going on with the rest of the league. And we're certainly cognizant of that. Like, it'd be ignorant of us to not, consider that. Yeah. You have to factor that in.
This is one thing where I think Nick's ability to separate emotion and pride and ego from negotiations or personnel decisions is huge, because I think he understands first and foremost that, like he said, you're not trying to win a negotiation. The classic, I'm going to win this negotiation, I'm going to get something over on him or whatever. That's awesome if you're like buying a car or buying a house or just having a one-off transaction with somebody. You're at a flea market, I don't know. But if you're going to have an ongoing working relationship with somebody, the last thing you want to do is get one over on that person, And if you do, even if you feel like you got one over on them or you get an extreme bargain, it's got to be because that guy is totally cool with it. I mean, famously, the best example of that would be that Tom Brady was cool for playing for way less than his market value for a long, long time with the Patriots. I don't think Nick believes that many other quarterbacks would or should have that attitude. I don't think you can expect guys to have that attitude, but that was just a dynamic that they were able to work with in New England there. There's some players that they really they want to have the highest average per year. They want the highest average per year on their contract. And all right, well, that's what that guy wants. Meanwhile, we as a team, we don't want to part with too much guaranteed money, or, to make that happen, we might have to take a little bit on the other side. And that's where, sometimes that can work out to the team's advantage, but then that player is just happy to have his ego stroked and to, for a little while, be the highest paid player. I saw when Randall Cobb was on the Bussin' with the Boys podcast, he was telling them, I think, which is the smart approach, is like he doesn't care at all about the average per year. He cares about the guaranteed money. Like, how much am I guaranteed? Or, in the bigger deals, how much comes in the first 2 years? And okay, whatever my average per year is, if I've got more guaranteed money than the other guys. And it's all individual. Like, commercial real estate negotiation a lot of times is like this, where you got two entities and one needs the deal to be structured a certain way. The other guy needs to get a certain return and based on what the interest rates are, and they kind of work together to find a deal that works. And I just in the long run, I think it's a better way to go about things. Nick is not a big fan of draft day celebrations from the war room. When you see the GM or the entire draft room, like with the Falcons, stand up and applaud when you land that 5th round pick. Not a fan.
I'll probably get cursed out for this, but, the teams that after they make a pick and then the camera's in the room, like, they have the whole room stand up and clap. Like, give me a break. But we just
call them out, Nick. Call them out.
We just pick the phone up. Hey, we're on the clock. We're about to pick you.
Okay, so the Colts, right? The Colts. The Colts damn do a docudrama on every draft pick they have, and Chris Ballard, the GM, just can't get over how much they nailed that pick. Oh, we got the best pass rusher in the draft. I feel like that was directed exactly at the Colts, and I think that Nick and Ballard probably get along just fine, but that's what I choose to believe. So the Colts are a fan base who CJ is already insulted by calling. What did he ever call? What kind of say? You guys all remember this stuff. What did he call the city of Indianapolis? Basically called it like a Bush League city in that little documentary that he did. And then his smack talk with Zaire Franklin and EJ Speed in the offseason. And I think this will be perceived as a shot at Chris Ballard. I'm feeling very, very good about all of this. I do think the next clip kind of speaks to perhaps why they don't have these huge celebrations. And it's another thing I really like about Nick Caserio is his realism about what the draft actually is.
Our room is very, I don't want to say relaxed, but it's just, we don't make it more than what it really is. So we're just kind of going through the process. You're going to go and pick the pick. All right, what's the next opportunity? What are our options? Is there an opportunity to trade? Are we going to pick? Are we going to move back? So you're just trying to keep it as normalized as possible because you don't want to make decisions under duress. It's like when you're on the field as a player, like you want to make sure you're in a good state of mind, that you're relaxed. If you put more pressure on yourself, then you're creating unnecessary tensions.
Yeah, and I think especially when you just, in anything in life, like Nick was saying, whether it's playing or drafting or gambling, which like the draft is, it's a gamble. Like anything in life, you're playing the probability with those picks. And I think Nick does a really good job, I'm guessing, of just looking at draft picks as just chips on or cards in a game of poker, just something that's a probability cloud, and that you can't get too wrapped up in getting one specific player. That's why he talks about the bands of players. I think he just kind of likes that ability to maneuver to a spot in the draft where you're going to get a guy that you've got rated that looks about appropriate for that spot in the draft. And I think that it serves two purposes. One is that on draft day, it keeps you from making rash decisions. It keeps you from getting, perhaps getting outside of your comfort zone or what your strategy was. Certainly, you just want to control your heart rate and your emotions in that moment. But I also think that it's really important when you get too wrapped up in a draft pick or when you're a little too confident in your appraisal of a player. That's when things start to happen. Like you ignore the seventh round defensive tackle in training camp because you're so psyched about how smart you were to draft the second round defensive tackle. And you continue to give that second round defensive tackle chance after chance after chance, when meanwhile some of the other players on your roster maybe are showing good things, but that second rounder's got his halo effect. So just whatever position, whatever draft pick it is, I think Nick very much understands some of these guys are going to develop, some aren't. Some of my draft assessments are going to be correct and some aren't. And you just got to keep an open mind about it all the time. And it starts with when you draft them. If you feel like you won the draft with a draft pick in the first round, you're not being 100% honest with yourself because you're forgetting all the various times that you or every brilliant GM who ever existed whiffed on a first round pick. It's just not, it's a big crapshoot in a lot of ways. So that's why I like Nick and his ability to be a robot. Nick on the new kickoff rules. I was going to grab a few just for illustrative purposes, but I ran out of time before the live stream. Punctuality was more important than actual quality. Jalen Ramsey.
I think the thing that really stands out is how quickly that play is going to take place from the time that the ball either hits the returner's hands or hits the ground. Then that triggers on both sides, both the coverage units and the return units getting in position. So the way it's set up right now, it's, I want to say 7-2, and then you have the two returners, right? Yeah. And the two can be 5 or 6 yards from, off the line from the
wall of people.
Yeah. Where you're a little light is honestly to the numbers as you get closer to the numbers because you have less bodies out there. So, and I would say the space, if you hit the space, if the returner hits the space, there's not a second level. So you're going to kind of probably have to come up with some things where you balance off the coverage units. You're going to need some players that have some size and strength that can get on an edge. By the same token, you're going to have players with speed where if the ball does break into the open field, they're able to chase and close. So you're probably going to have different body types on your team. You can't build your team based on the kickoff rule.
Play,
Just understand there's going to be more plays and there's going to be more returns. Who the returner is could be a little bit different.
Okay, so the first guy I thought of as Nick was explaining all of that, especially on the coverage side of it, was Dare Ogunbowale, the running back / place kicker. I wonder if kind of like in Kansas City where they're talking about Justin Reed doing the kickoffs, if there is going to be that much more of an emphasis on coverage, the kickers become field goal and extra point specialists more so than guys who are kickoff guys too. But it opens up a whole lot of possibilities. I think that without really predicting exactly how it's going to look in the NFL. I mean, because we can see the examples from the lesser leagues there that have done it this way. You don't know exactly how everything's going to play out and exactly who's going to thrive and exactly what personnel you need. I like that. I think Frank Ross probably has a good beat on it. And I think Frank Ross, in just how good he's been consistently over time, if there's an inefficiency to be exploited here while other teams try to figure it out, hopefully that's an advantage the Texans have early on. That would be my blind faith in Frank Ross would tell me that. Okay, this is a issue near and dear to my heart. So for those of you who don't know, the Texans, since Nick Caserio has been GM, have never drafted a player who wasn't in a Power 5 conference. They've only gone with large school guys. Tank Dell is the one exception on kind of on a technicality because Tank wasn't in the Big 12 when the U of H went to. So as of right now, Tank Dell is the only non-Power 5 conference guy, even though the U of H is now in a Power 5 conference. Look, it's been long enough now, Nick. It's not just like small samples that like. Why do you hate small school guys so much? Everybody except Tank Dell on a technicality wasn't a Power 5 guy, but you drafted nothing but Power 5 guy. Is it just the level of competition that they face? Do you feel better about it?
No, in the end, it goes back to the same thing, the player. So we're not anti-small school.
You haven't drafted any. You wouldn't have drafted me, I'll tell you that much.
In the 3-4, you would have been a good fit. So
but I went to a small school. I feel like the Patriots would have loved me. Nick Caserio with the Patriots would have loved taking a guy from Cornell.
We took Kyle Duggar from Lenore Ryan back in the day.
But with the Texans, it's been nothing but Power 5.
So we'll have to change that. We'll change that narrative.
Okay, good. Thank you. You're welcome to whichever kid gets drafted from a small school.
Purely a coincidence.
Yeah, I'm not buying it. I call bogus on that. It's not. It's just weird because in New England they were notorious for taking guys from Lenore Ryan or what have you. They had one draft where their top 2 draft picks were guys from non-Division I schools, or at least like a very minor conference from a non-Division I school. So I suspect with Nick that a lot of the GPS or the body tracking data that schools use and some of the information that you have from the bigger schools and the programs, I think my suspicion is that he weights that pretty heavily because it's objective and because you can compare it to other guys and you can watch the way guys practice and all of that. And then when you add into it just the level of competition where you can see them week in, week out. Remember with Derek Stingley, he had talked about how it wasn't just Derek Stingley's film. It was going back and like watching him versus Jamar Chase in practice when he was a freshman. And I think that it's not like Nick doesn't appreciate that there are plenty of small school guys who make it in the NFL. I just wonder if he trusts it more. And he wasn't going to, I actually thought, we had him pretty loosened up at that point. I thought he might have told us something on it. And I still feel a little bit put out. I feel put out that I would have been okay. I would have been okay for Bill Belichick, but not Nick Caserio somehow. I'm offended is what I'm trying to tell you. Caserio on what he's seen so far of Stephon Diggs.
Yeah, the way he works. I mean, you heard this out of Buffalo, just his competitiveness and his work ethic, like when he's on the field. I think when you have really good players, I mean, CJ's like this, they're competitive, and they care about winning, and it's about the work. And every time they go on the field, it's very purposeful. But he's been great. And I think the one thing that when you see him up close, and obviously when you watch him play, he's been a good run after catch player. And he's not necessarily, quote unquote, the biggest guy. He's 6 foot, 90 pounds. But when you get up on him and, around his shoulders, I mean, this guy is rocked up.
Yeah.
So you can see why people bounce off of him. So there's a reason why he's been, a good run after catch player over the course of his career.
He's deceptively sturdy, and I would second that. When I saw him in person at the press conference, I was kind of like, oh, yeah, that's not a little, that's a scary little dude right there. Good point here by Roosh, which is the portal. Top small school kids transfer to big schools now before they get drafted, like the kid from Florida State that Nick had mentioned. I can't remember if it was on that clip or in the interview. Yeah, that's a really good point. But I don't know, man. I don't know. Was that the last one from Nick? That was the last one from Nick. Yeah, Stefon Diggs was everything you'd want him to be at the end of OTAs and on into minicamp there. I was on a radio station in Rochester, New York yesterday where they're Bills, that's Bills country up there. And we talked about, the fact that Stefon Diggs, the first couple of years he was in Buffalo, it was an absolute dream between him and Josh Allen. The one thing they brought up that was interesting, and I hadn't thought too much about, but which was that, they want Josh Allen to take a leap forward this year, I think, as a leader, but also, and Josh Allen himself has talked about this, mentally, like they need him to start being that guy that's got the defense figured out. And they need him to process in a way where he's not as quick to bail out and use his legs, or that he doesn't get fixated on the first read or anything like that. And he made a lot of progress when Joe Douglas took over as offensive coordinator. But the interesting question that the guy asked me was whether he thought that there could have been like a big brother, little brother dynamic with Josh Allen and Stefon Diggs, and that maybe in getting the big brother out of the room that Josh can thrive more as a leader. I think that's very valid. In the case of that relationship specifically was that, remember, nobody knew what to make of Josh Allen in those 2 years before Stefon Diggs showed up, and then everything kind of clicked. Josh Allen made mechanical changes. Stefon Diggs was there as an option. But I think that Stefon Diggs always kind of had an older brother vibe there. And, if you equate it to like an extreme example might be Eli Manning with the tight end from Miami. Damn it. I haven't even been live streaming that long today. With Shockey, that when Shockey left, it seemed like Eli kind of was free to do everything, like mentally almost, like he didn't feel that burden of Shockey demanding the ball or telling him how to do things. I don't worry about that with CJ because CJ is just he's a full-grown man when it comes to the mental side of things. And he already has such a good grasp of this offense and understanding the defenses that I think that Stefon Diggs will be a very good resource as an older player, and I think he can teach CJ a lot of things. But I don't think you're going to have that same dynamic where all of a sudden, CJ's trying to placate Stefon Diggs or anything like that. And it's a one-year deal. Stefon Diggs has every reason in the world to feel awesome and just be the perfect soldier and be all about the team, all that stuff, et cetera, et cetera. So, Matt Burke, defensive coordinator for the Texans, he spoke before minicamp and only a couple weeks into OTAs, but I never got to a few of the clips from Matt Burke, and I never shared them with you. But just several of the clips of Matt Burke that I found most interesting. First, man, I wrote in my notes here. Okay, for those of you who've been on the live stream the entire time, for some reason, I was calling Jalen Petrie Jalen Ramsey. I only did it about 7 or 8 times. I'm looking down at my notes right here, and I've got Matt Burke on Jalen Ramsey. So, this is Matt Burke on Jalen Petrie. And I'll go get checked out for whatever the hell's wrong with me after this.
I think Jalen's knowledge of the defense, again, some of it we're scrambling a little bit last year, obviously, and things are flying, and again, sort of having banking those hours that Jalen did. It's showing up now, just his level of communication, his sort of comfort in some of those things. Again, we just try to ask all these guys to if you think you stink, like to just not.
Okay, so real quick, he kind of like omitted a comma as he was saying it. He wasn't saying if you think you stink, then he was saying if you think you stink. So if you're thinking too much, you stink. It was confusing the first time I heard it.
Not be thinking when you're out there. So the more reps you have and the more comfort you have in the system and the scheme and the calls, it frees you up to go make those plays and to let their athleticism shine. So,
Yeah, and I think that there were a few instances of that. For one, in the Cleveland game, when we've talked about this before, that huge Amari Cooper reception down the left sideline when the defensive back who hadn't played at cornerback all year was one-on-one with Amari Cooper, and Jalen Petrie just came up to charge the tight end, and Amari Cooper ended up on his way to 240 yards receiving that day. Jalen Petrie was benched after that play. I have conflicting feelings about it because one of the reasons Jalen Petrie was overly aggressive there was that the linebackers had all bid on the play action and the tight end was running just wide open and free. So I can understand where Jalen Petrie was tempted, yet at the same time, he'd gotten specific instructions to hear the way DeMeco kind of talked about it after the play, to bracket Amari Cooper. That's a little bit of the overthinking, perhaps, and trying to do too much than just playing your role. There are other times, like versus the Titans, it was pretty notable. He got burned on some double moves by DeAndre Hopkins, where I think he was anticipating an in-breaking and an out-breaking route. And DeAndre, who's just masterful in manipulating defensive backs at times, he manipulated a young second-year safety. So when I look back and look at some of the more glaring issues that Jalen Petrie had last year, they tend to be on the either inexperienced side of things or the over-aggressiveness or things like that. It's not that he lacks intelligence whatsoever. It's that I think sometimes, this is how it was with Andrew Luck as a quarterback. It was just like with Ryan Fitzpatrick too. Two super bright guys that at times made horrendously stupid decisions because they were overthinking things. And like with Ryan Fitzpatrick, I know just from talking to defensive backs, there were guys that kind of knew that Ryan Fitzpatrick was trying to play five-dimensional chess, and they could kind of bait him by showing him a look that thought he was going to be able to take advantage of him. Andrew Luck, the same thing, just kind of thinking way too far ahead at times, and he wouldn't see the linebacker who had dropped into coverage. So I think with Jalen Petrie, there might be a little bit of that. Sometimes when you're a bright kid, your own intelligence can be your worst enemy, and you got to learn how to just be a dumb football player. Do you remember the old Bob Golick, not Mike Golick, Bob Golick. I'm getting my names right. Bob Golick talking about how playing nose tackle, you have to like devolve into a more simplified human. You gotta like hunch your shoulders and almost you gotta start being more on instinct. You can't act like a civilized human being. Defensive line, you can get away with that. You got to be a bit more civilized to be the other guys, but you do have to just understand when and where it's about drill work and it's about making the proper response. And I think so. I'm optimistic about Petrie this year. My long-winded way of saying that I'm optimistic about Jalen Petrie. This is Matt Burke on Christian Harris.
As in that are at a professional level, that are guys that do it the right way, that approach, their craft the right way. And so, Christian sort of latching on to Azeez and seeing how he's done it and kind of how he's gotten to where he's gotten to has sort of enhanced Christian's development, I think, for sure. I think he's made a pretty big jump already this offseason and hope that continues.
Yeah, I've spoken about this a lot. I think that Azeez Al-Shaair is going to be awesome for Christian Harris and for Henry To'oTo'o and for anybody else who's competing at Sam linebacker. I think he's going to be really good for them. I've talked about Christian Harris. Henry To'oTo'o, he's an interesting one to me because I saw Henry To'oTo'o do things last year that didn't jibe with what I had seen from him in college. And some of it was just some of the angles he was taking to the ball, some of where he was fitting or not fitting in run defense. He looked like a guy who might himself be overthinking things. And DeMeco, when I asked DeMeco about this during the minicamp about Christian Harris, DeMeco had said Christian had just midway through the season when he started to pick up and just basically doubled his production in the second half of the season, that he just started to trust himself and trust his keys and just let the game come to him in a lot of ways, to paraphrase what DeMeco said. I think with Henry To'oTo'o, he might be a little bit on that same track where I think physically, I don't know what his upside is. He's not as gifted as Christian Harris is, but I know that when it comes to his linebacker instincts and his fundamentals and some things like that, he looked like a guy who was thinking too much out there. So Azeez Al-Shaair hopefully can be a great resource for those guys. So I'm optimistic about that. That's one of my lingering issues is just what is Henry To'oTo'o and can we see the upside in him? Because I still think there's more good football in him than we saw last year. He's just got to get comfortable. Next one was, this is Caserio on Azeez Al-Shaair. Just for those of you who hadn't caught this clip when he was in with us, Caserio talking about Azeez Al-Shaair and the worth he brings both as a worker and as a leader.
So I was going to work out, do my workout, and Azeez was in there, and he has this ritual or habit where he puts on a weighted vest and he walks in the afternoon just to continue to work. And he was out there, he was on a phone, he's making a call or doing something, and he was doing his walk, and there was literally nobody around. So I think there's things behind the scenes that people don't see, and he's actually taken other players. I think he's taken C. Harris along the way, and they've done similar things. And really, that's an opportunity for those players to connect away from the field, away from the meeting room, and just spend time amongst each other. And you can't put a price tag on that because in the end, it's about the players and the relationships that they establish.
Yeah.
But
I feel it's a little bit of an alpha move too, that you wear a vest, but he's wearing a weighted vest, Nick. And that guy's talking. How much you vest today?
Nice down vest.
I had a 25-pound vest for my afternoon stroll.
I was going to say, I have the
his
exact.
serves a purpose. Mine is more of a fashion statement, I guess.
You know about. All right, turns out that was self-serving. I just wanted to play my little joke there again, apparently. I honestly forgot that joke was at the end of the Aziz Alshire part, even though it was specifically about Aziz Alshire. But the other part of that is, I think DeMeco, in being a linebackers coach turned defensive coordinator, now head coach, he's always going to be fighting that fight to where he probably wants to be over in that linebacker group for 75% of the practice, but he knows he can't. He's got to be concerned about larger picture items. So I think Aziz Alshire, in having been brought up under DeMeco Ryans, I think DeMeco probably looks at a little bit as a surrogate coach, not that he needs to be an actual assistant coach or anything, but it's one more resource of a guy that's been in his defense and understands it and knows it and can be an added resource above and beyond just being a veteran player. So this is Matt Burke on what Will Anderson has been working on this offseason. And I played part of this when we did the Will Anderson stuff, just in that we know what he's working on. It's more about DeMeco's whole offseason philosophy and the way he teaches and coaches that's interesting to me.
Like small thing like separation, like trying to get more extension and separation at the top of his rush, or things that like we've worked on. One of the really cool, it's just part of DeMeco's sort of system of how we do things. Every player that we have, we do an off-season sort of like study or off-season project on for, we call them pro-grow tapes. So like just one thing or something specific that each player can grow and get better at from what we saw off tape last year, whether they were here or somewhere else. So like we try to give each player something very specific, like, hey, we saw this on tape last year, like, let's focus on this, like for these next 6 weeks. Can you get better at this? So like that's off your plate, and that's a step in the right direction.
I can tell you, I played in the NFL for 10 years, 4 years of college. Never had anything like that. Like, I know it sounds simple enough, right? And as a player, sometimes that's what it feels like. You go into every practice knowing that there's a million things you got to work on and knowing that you're going to be coached about a million things. And there were times where, man, I wish I could focus in on this one thing. But it's hard. It's hard sometimes. And I think with some organizations too, it's almost like they don't want to give players too much overall feedback because it's like almost like a pre-contract negotiation. It's the NFL is a weird place in a lot of ways. The way they used to do business. This is an offshoot of DeMeco having been a player, and not every former player ends up bringing like an awesome bunch of lessons that he conveys to his players. There's plenty of them that suck. I think DeMeco understands and knows that like how players best operate and absorb information. And I just love that they identify a big thing. And it's the old 80-20 principle too. Is just if this one thing, this one small thing that's 20% of your game could improve you by a vast amount, like focus in on that, and then we'll address the next big thing. And Will has cited it, talking about having to get separation. He's talked about some of the other little finer aspects that he's talking about with Daniil Hunter, but that's a big thing, is Will not just getting kind of locked up at the top of his rush and ending up maybe getting a pressure or making the quarterback uncomfortable, but instead of really separating and coming clean. That's what Will started to get a lot better at the end of last season, and that's what he's working on now. Next is Matt Burke on Derek Stingley.
I've seen Sting in the building since February. I mean, he's been here like every day, even before the offseason program started, like working across the way in the bubble, like getting himself ready. So I think he's really locked in and committed to trying to maybe take it to that next level.
Take it to the limit. This is the thing about Derek Stingley, and I think people wouldn't really appreciate it, or they don't want to necessarily hear it until they see him just have a full season. Is he works his butt off. Like if you go out to training camp this year, stick around afterwards and watch Derek Stingley, because he'll be out there. No matter how hot it is, he's out there with a young wide receiver usually a different one every day. A few guys will come out for a few days, but he's out there working on releases, working on hand fighting, doing all these things, or working with other defensive backs. He really, really works at it. And then away from the cameras, where all of his workouts, everything, he's always been very serious about those things. His dad's very involved with, training him and everything. So he's always been that guy. I guess my only concern is, and I even hate saying this, is we've seen guys like J.J. Watt who are maniacal workers, but then eventually their bodies break down. And, and again, you can never point it to was it the tire flips and the box jumps that ultimately wore JJ's body down, or was it just playing defensive tackle or defensive end in the NFL? I don't know. But Stingley hasn't had a completely healthy season since 2019, going back to college and on into the NFL. I hope that, kind of like with Nico Collins, he's figured some things out about what he needs to do for his particular routine. Carlos Correa back in the day had to figure out a routine that worked for him so he didn't get injured so often. With Carlos, it was mostly his back. I hope that's what it is, because he played at an all-pro caliber, but it was only for 11 games. If he plays that way for 17 games, he'll be an all-pro. And people around the league noticed it. They especially noticed it in the playoffs. So I just fingers crossed for him, because the kid does everything the right way. He's just got to stay on the field. Kamari Lassiter. This is Matt Burke on the second-round pick, Kamari Lassiter.
Yeah, no, I would say the versatility is probably the starting point for Kamari. He's got length. He's not, those guys, Jeff's got really long arms. Kamari's got length. He's not a small corner. And he's actually really well built through his lower here. So he's kind of a powerful, he's a pretty stout corner. I think, again, another guy, just more talking about those interchangeable pieces and the versatility of can we move him inside? Can we play him outside? Is there matchups that we like better? Again, a little bit's going to be, how much he can absorb. He's shown a really good, he's just a really smart football player and grasps things pretty well. So, up to this point, he's kind of absorbed everything we're throwing at him pretty good. So I would say that would be always the limiting thing for younger players, how much can they learn and know at different positions and where we're trying to move them into spots. So
the thing about Kamari Lassiter, we talked about this earlier in the stream, is that the way they talk about him, the things they like about him, his physical stature, all of those things add up to a guy that I think they hope is a really good zone cornerback. That doesn't mean that he never plays man. He's going to play man a bunch, but DeMeco's defense is always going to play a lot of zone. That's just the way it is structured. So if you think about the old Lovie Smith defenses in Chicago, or some of the ones from Tampa, or just what have you, Rondé Barber in Tampa, tough physical dude that'll come up and tackle, can play man, but really more than anything knows how to patrol his zones and is super smart and can diagnose. That's what I think they hope they get out of Kamari Lassiter, and it was a good look for him so far. In minicamps and OTAs, this time of year, the 7-on-7 stuff is about the only stuff, or the wide receivers versus defensive backs. That's the only stuff you can really get good work out of, because everything that happens in the middle of the field, there's no contact. And he did a good job. And I think he took some lumps in a good way. He made some plays and showed up. But the fact that they were impressed with his ability to diagnose and a lot of the mental things, that's encouraging. And I don't think they'll hesitate to play him in week 1 if they feel like he's the guy. With Okudah and Henderson, those guys have the traits of guys that theoretically should be really good man coverage guys. Guys that they both got taken in the top 10 of the draft. But sometimes the very things that hold those guys back are all the stuff that they want Kamari Lassiter to be able to do, which is just you got to have a high football IQ to be nails in zone coverage, and as a rookie especially, you got to be able to diagnose patterns, route combinations, all those things. Somebody had earlier asked about whether the Texans would use a lot of blended coverages or not. I guess I would just say that that's the rule more than the exception in the NFL. There's a lot of zone. It's rarely that you're just dropping to a zone the way your high school kids do. You're playing zone to man and picking up routes, or you're changing your responsibility based on a route combination. So I think the big thing to watch for with DeMeco's defense is two things. One, that Derek Stingley's ability to track your number one receiver on either side of the field, or to be your lockdown corner, I think frees you up to do a lot of other things with everybody else. If he can be that guy where you can throw, you don't have to worry about your safeties worrying about Derek Stingley's guy. Like I think there's that. The other is just that towards the end of last season, they started disguising a lot more and a lot better. And that Christian Harris pick 6 really was because they showed a look that made Joe Flacco think that they showed a look that made, I got to replay it in my brain. I'll fact check myself on this afterwards. Flacco thought Christian Harris was going to be manned up on the running back. Blake Cashman was at the line of scrimmage, and the coverage they were showing, they shifted at the snap, and then Christian Harris ends up playing a zone instead of being manned up on the running back, and he was just sitting there waiting for that pass. So they did a lot more as the season went along, as guys got comfortable with the defense. You've got Azeez Elshire, who's already comfortable in the defense. You've got the other guys on the back end who now have had a year in this defense. So I think, they'll be more complex on defense. They'll be more exotic at times. I don't think DeMeco's ever going to stray from mostly being a team that, as he'll say, the engine is up front on that defensive line. And the key there is when you're playing that, it's that, okay, we might play a lot of zone behind you, but that means we're not blitzing to get a pass rush. We have to get a pass rush. One of those 4 guys has to come open. And that's again, where I think Kamari Lassiter might end up being really good in a scheme like that if it's working out. Let's see. Oh, he's got length is very popular to say these days. It is. In the life of Colby, you got to get your mind out of the gutter. My God. I can't use anything about measurements or balls or anything without in the life of Colby stepping in. Yeah, I apologize deeply for 19 times saying Jalen Ramsey instead of Jalen Petrie. The real shocker was that we, in that world, if you were to believe what I was saying and thought I was talking about Jalen Ramsey, it would be that the Texans had acquired Jalen Ramsey and that they were moving him to safety. I feel like Jalen Ramsey wouldn't be happy about that, nor David Mulligetta. Lamar was not running until Harris went down in that divisional round. Yeah, Harris was all over the place in that game. Christian Harris, he doubled his tackle output, more than doubled his tackle output from his first 8 games of the season to the second 8. He missed 1 game due to injury, so he played 16 regular season games. But Sean Pendergast is the one that noted that his TFLs went from 1 in the first 8 games to, I want to say, 9 in the second 8 games. And his total tackle production, which, using tackles as a gauge for how good a linebacker is can be dicey. But in terms of one individual in the same defense in the same season, he doubled his production in the second half. I remember just like a switch flipped in him all of a sudden, where he was hitting guys with a proper leverage. He was flying around all over the place, just continuing to work on play action recognition, understanding his role in pass coverage, all that stuff, the finer aspects of the game. That's where he needs to keep working. But yeah, he took a giant leap forward. That was maybe like the best evidence of the DeMeco Ryans pixie dust last year, is that we started to see the best version of Christian Harris after spending half a season with DeMeco Ryans. So thank you for hanging out, everybody. And I'm going to, when I do live stream, it's typically going to be at 1 p.m. Central. So I'm not going to be able to do it every day leading into the training camp. Training camp dates were announced today, by the way. I think July, you guys probably all already know. If you're watching this in June, you probably already know. I want to say July 18th or something. So then I'll start in with the daily live streams, and they're going to be at 1 p.m. And then I'll chop some of these up. I'll edit out me saying Jalen Ramsey and just put them in more consumable 10-minute chunks later in the day. So thank you, everybody. If you liked it, please hit the like button and subscribe. And enable your notifications and do all that. You need me on your phone whenever you're bored. If you get that notification, you'll say, hell yes, I hope my wait at the doctor's office is even longer. Thank you, Seth.